Hi, I'm Jeremy Ruston, and welcome to the 98th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm joined today from left to right on my screen, we start with Atul. Atul, would you like to say hi, introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your use of TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming
Hello.
through loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Atul Grover. I'm from India, and I've been following TiddlyWiki for a long time now. I really believe that there is a scope for a lot of things that we really need something like this in India. What I'm trying to do is something like Tiddly Skills, where we have small competencies, bite-sized competencies to train people. Since there's a lot of stress on skill development in India, so we're just trying to see how something like TiddlyWiki can come in with small bite-sized curriculum, which can be loaded on phones and can be, the education is more democratic and more open, decentralized.
Yeah. Indeed. And Atul was a part last year of the group that we briefly got together to try to push TiddlyWiki education applications. I think we didn't go as far as we wanted to, and I hope that's an effort that we'll pick up again. I mean, I guess particularly when I'm less busy, because I think that was one of the problems last year, was I couldn't give it as much time as I wanted to. But Atul, thank you very much for joining us, and glad you're here to join the discussion. Jed, hi, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself in the usual way?
Hi, I'm Jed. I am currently living in Paris. I used to be in the US. I started using TiddlyWiki to keep track of my thesis notes for my PhD work, and now I use it as something that I play with in my free time and make stuff with. And yeah, I've been working on Twitteration, and actually recently I've been putting a lot of work into the Resume Builder edition. I might show a bit of that later, now that I think about that. And yeah, but I make stuff. I'm Jed.
Jed, brilliant. Thanks you can join me. I'm just going to jot down the resume demo, and there was something else you mentioned there that we might get you to show.
Just Twitteration stuff. I'm not sure if I have too much. I can look at that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jed. Mario, good to see you here again. Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself in the usual way?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributed to TiddlyWiki 5 with the language translation for German and Austrian. And yeah, I'd like to show you something today.
Excellent. Very pleased that you could join us, Mario. Next, Scott. Hi, Scott. How are you doing? Would you like to introduce yourself, please, in the usual way?
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Simmons. I'm in the American South in South Carolina. I'm a TiddlyWiki user since about 2009, 2010. Currently working my way through the wilds of TiddlyWiki 5, trying to bring over several years' worth of content and workflow into the modern version of TiddlyWiki and finding it quite a delight. I have nothing to show today, but I have two eyeballs with which I would like to look at many things.
Excellent. Very pleased that you could join us, Scott. And last but not least, somebody who hasn't been with us for a few weeks, sadly, but Toby, very pleased to see you here today. Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself in the usual way?
Sure. This is Tobias from Leipzig. I've been using TiddlyWiki since about 2007 or 8, and doing lots of plugin development and also documentation projects, I would say, like tiddlywiki.org, and making my own solutions collection, like Jed also did. Yeah, recently I've been a little bit absent from this community due to my efforts of applying for jobs. So, yeah. Today I don't really think I have anything to show, but yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, one thing you might want to think about in the background is I'm still sitting on my backlog of Google group messages that I haven't had a chance to reply to from when I was away at the beginning of January. So I'm aware that there are a number of threads there where we've got discussions open that we've left hanging. So if there's anything in that category that you'd like to pick up today, that's probably a good opportunity. But today we're going to start with one particular item. So you'll remember at the beginning of the year, in I think Hangout 96, we started talking about this topic that I was calling finishing TiddlyWiki 5, and it was the idea of trying to apply the final bits of fit and finish to TiddlyWiki to particularly fix the areas where we've only got experimental support. We really need something more robust. So one add-on about the software, but part of it and getting the tools and the mechanisms that the community uses better developed. And one particular area is I want to be able to update TiddlyWiki.com much more rapidly. So I gave us the goal that what would be ideal is if the sort of people who are on this call who answer questions on the Google group, once we get to the point I'm about to describe, I'd like it that when people post problems, that Toby, say, says, oh, I can answer that, but instead of answering directly, it's actually, the goal is to make it as easy for Toby to make a change to the relevant documentation on TiddlyWiki.com, for that change to go live so that it's live on TiddlyWiki.com, and then Toby replies on the group with a link to that item of documentation on TiddlyWiki.com. Now, I think if we could achieve that, if we could get to the point where, so it's got to be as easy for Toby and all the other people who are answering these messages to be able to answer the message in that way by updating TiddlyWiki.com than it is at the moment. And I think if we do that, we will slowly and steadily improve the documentation. And to be honest, you can see the evidence for this. I mean, the evidence that this can work is partly provided by Tobias, because I think you've been working in exactly that way with a couple of your Tiddly Spot wikis, where essentially if there's an interesting enough answer that you've answered on the group, you make an update to the Tiddly Spot wiki. So I'm talking about an even more accelerated version of that, I guess, because I want rather than copying the reply from the group, I think the idea is if we update the site and then link to it from the group. But before we dive into that, let me break for a second to ask Eric if you have a microphone. Can you introduce yourself, Eric?
Microphone.
Hi. We are hearing you loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, good morning. It is 7:20 something here in the morning on the west coast of California, and this is Eric Eshelman, and I am the author of Tiddly Tools and InsideTiddlyWiki, the missing manuals, and I've been involved with TiddlyWiki for over 10 years. As a matter of fact, a kind of quiet anniversary has passed. It was the beginning of February of
2006
that I actually established the tiddlytools.com domain, which was just a week after Jeremy had visited here for the first time. Jeremy, you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so that was 10 years ago, the beginning of February. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, anyway, I'm here. I'm making coffee, and I'm not fully awake, as I discovered when I tried to make coffee. There's a kind of a, what do you call it, a paradox. It's like, how can you make the coffee if you haven't had your coffee yet?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I'm in the coffee paradox zone, but continue with the regular thing.
Well, we will expect to hear gurgles in the background as you consume your coffee, Eric. So, as I say, a few weeks ago, we talked quite a bit about this topic of reorganizing things so that we can make updates to TiddlyWiki.com more rapidly. And in the meantime, Mario has dived away and, as far as I can tell, got all of the basic technological pieces that we need up and running and working. So hopefully Mario is going to do us a demo on your massive mega screen or on a normal screen. Yeah. Okay.
So I hope you can see something.
That really is amazing.
You can hear me. So what you see on the right? Do you see something on the right?
Yeah.
This is actually automatically generated by TiddlyWiki or with TiddlyWiki content by TiddlyWiki with some special templates, and that's, let's say, a raw state how I think it could look like. And this is the landing page for the languages. So every language will or can have its own page, which is basically the TiddlyWiki that we have already. But this can be done with TiddlyWiki. Jeremy made me owner, or administrator of the TiddlyWiki group, so I'm on the left side now, and I created a language repository which contains some README and some stuff which I did fork. So the standard workflow is that this is something like the upstream, and on my local TiddlyWiki, if I go to my TiddlyWiki, I just have forked it, and now I can work with it. So what did I do? I created a new edition. There is some stuff which is needed. Or what I wanted to do is that it works with Unix systems and also with Windows systems. And there is one thing which is quite nice. So we have to use Node to build the stuff. So I created a package.json which has some run commands. So I can say something like this. If I go to npm run, there is something which is called a dev server, which starts up a lot of things. Oops, my mouse. Okay. And then some magic happens. As you can see, it starts a lot of things, and I have a local host which is working on port 3000. So what I get, oh, come on, my mouse doesn't work. One moment. Okay. So I get the local host and port 3000. Not get, oops, why not? Okay. So now this is a little development server which can host the page, so the static page. And now I go to localhost 8080, which gives me TiddlyWiki. So now if I change something here, what do I change? Germany. If I change some text here, and everything should be automatically updated after a while on the right side if everything works. Where's my test? Okay, now it works. But as I said, I have some trouble with the CSS and also a little bit with the rendering mechanism. But as you can see here, it says this is a test now. So, and this gives me a nice possibility that on the left side I can change the content, and on the right side I automatically get an updated version from the static rendering. So this is the first step. And the second step is, how can we bring all this automatically to TiddlyWiki, to the page tiddlywiki.com. And there is something which is called the Travis CI. Is there still everyone with me?
Yep.
Okay. There is a thing which is called Travis CI, which lets us build from repositories. There is a lot of sensible default settings, so installing the stuff is not very complicated. That's a little bit of documentation reading, but I don't know, it's about 10 different steps, and then everything works. And this can build from these languages. So I made a connection, as you can see. This is the TiddlyWiki repository. It's called TiddlyWiki Languages, and we have a connection here with TiddlyWiki Languages on the right side with Travis. there is some options, some settings. So we can define that there is a GitHub token which allows us, if Travis builds something, that it's actually pushed back to the TiddlyWiki repository. So there are some settings and so on. So what I can do now, I can go to my local version and push it. So because I made some changes, I can say, okay, I want to push it to my repository. Okay. Oh, it's up to date. First I have to say commit, sorry. Why can't I? Okay. Commit. Hangout test. Okay. Now I have some changes. Now I push them. Okay, start is done. I can go to my repository now. So now, okay, it sees it here. It says, okay, TiddlyWiki languages. It sees that I did something. I can say compare and pull now. Okay, now I create a standard pull request. This is the standard behavior. Create a pull request, and now someone can review it. In this case, it's me or Jeremy or someone which has write access to the TiddlyWiki repository. And if everything is okay, we can say, oops, pull request. We can merge them. So merge the pull request, say confirm merge. And now, if you have a look on the right side, after some time, it should start. It should automatically start a build. This can take some time. Now it works. So it creates environment. It loads. In this case, I think it's Ubuntu environment. Then it installs TiddlyWiki after some time. Yeah, now there is, it installs Node. Node is there already. Then it says npm install, which I created in the package JSON file. So it tells Travis what to install. Then it installs TiddlyWiki. Then it does some build static, so it builds the static file. Then it deploys the stuff to the repository. So we have what we have now here is the languages, and it's in the branch. It's called GitHub Pages. So that's the default. And what I have now here is static HTML, but the CSS is missing because, as I said, I broke the CSS. What we have here then is quite plain. At the moment it says classic, tiddlywiki.com, languages, static, and yeah, if I do a reload now, then, okay, somewhere there is a CSS, okay, maybe it gets something, but as you can see, it looks a little bit different because I broke the CSS. But that's the basic workflow. As you can see, so we have a possibility now to change something directly here with a development environment. So every tiddler that I change triggers an automatic rebuild of the static file also. So I can say tiddlers, and if I change any of those tiddlers, this also triggers an automatic reload and gives me the local environment. And then if I push it, if I create the pull request, then Travis takes over and does all the magic and pushes the stuff to the page. So that's basically it. So this is all the bits and pieces tied together, and it works quite nicely. It's not very complicated. Many moving parts, but yeah, they're relatively simple tied together. Yeah. So that's it for the basics.
So has everybody understood what Mario is showing there? I've got a couple of questions, but I just want to make sure everybody is comfortable with what they saw there. So one question I had is, we saw there that when you triggered Travis, it came up with a raw box and had to install Node and then install TiddlyWiki. Is that always the case? Is it possible to I don't know, to use a box that already has Node on it, for instance? I guess.
No, this is the Travis always starts from the beginning. I don't know what they cache, so it's quite fast. It needs about, I don't know, 10 seconds or something like this to start up the stuff and install TiddlyWiki, and it's always the same. So this is their basic workflow, that you always start from a very new environment, so that you always get the same results when something is built.
Before Christmas, I did some work with Amazon Lambda. I think I talked about it on the Hangout, which is very similar. It's code that you sort of pre-register, and then it gets invoked when it receives triggered by the right kind of event. But of course, that's very Node focused. You come up into a machine that already has Node installed.
In this case, Travis is a testing environment that gives you a general purpose testing environment which can do everything. That is one thing which I forgot. There is also you have several hooks, so you can say, okay, if something is merged, everything is pushed and created, or you can also say, if something, if there is a pull request which is created, then it should probably build to a temporary store, so that you can have a live review or the preview, and this is also possible.
And that's very timely, because we've had some discussions on GitHub recently about some quite deep improvements to the widget mechanism. Jed's been involved in those as well. And I reckon that establishing a branch for that work is going to be necessary, because it's going to take quite a few iterations, I think, to get that right. And so, yes, that automated building of branches, pushing them so that people can try them out, would be very useful. So I think that you have indeed demonstrated everything that we need to know how to do. In terms now of fixing things up, there's a couple of things. I think there's some more goals. So you were particularly focused on, what you were showing was around the languages. We need to look at the site as a whole, and I think there are, in fact, the idea that you've got there of building a static page to service the landing page for all the languages, as I think I have discussed on previous Hangouts, I want to do that for TiddlyWiki.com, so that TiddlyWiki.com is a news, basically.
There can be the same mechanism. That's why I was using a template that looks similar to a blogging platform, because this is, let's say, a second level page.
Well, and I think it's very useful that you've done it based on languages, because there is no existing infrastructure there. So it's a very clear place to experiment. The other things that we need to do cut into existing infrastructure and will involve making changes that will be visible to all of the developers. So, and I'm particularly thinking about moving repos around. So one of the questions, I guess it is I think in order to satisfy my goal of being able to dynamically update the documentation, I think we may need to move it into its own repo. And that has significant implications, because obviously the TiddlyWiki repo at the moment is self-contained. If you download, intentionally you download that one repo, you get everything you need to work with TiddlyWiki on your own machine. So that's to me, a very threatening move that we need to make sure that we do it right.
Yeah, but I think it's relatively simple, because I made a repository which has several things. For example, the package JSON, it contains everything. So the basic mechanism is that you say fork the language, then you say npm install. It installs all the dependencies that you need, and then you can say npm run dev server.
So to be clear, when I'm talking about
would be possible for the landing page of TiddlyWiki. I have installed, opened it. So this is pure CSS where I started from.
I know.
Similar to something like this.
So my concern isn't the technical feasibility of how we would build a static front page. I mentioned that in passing actually because I mean I think your prototyping has actually addressed two things. It's addressed automatic builds of the languages and it's addressed static landing pages. They're actually separate things. But no, my concern is, as I say, if we move the documentation to another repo, it will be a huge change to the way that TiddlyWiki is distributed, and it will be a massively non-backwards compatible change. So I don't want to just shruggingly sleepwalk into doing that. If we're going to make a change like that, it needs to be absolutely right. And you know, the logic as to why the documentation needs to move to another repo needs to be robust. The same goes for the languages. You know, there are right now we simplify everything by having everything in a single repo. Moving the languages out into their own repos has clear advantages, as you've shown. There's also a question of should we do it for each of the editions. So I raised before the fact that some editions are the editions that are based on Node.js, and so, for instance, need external Node.js packages. They really need to be distributed as repos that people fork. So that's what I'm trying to say, Mario, is that yes, we've done the technical exploration, but now we need to make very careful plans. So I think actually what you've done here, for instance, you have assumed that we are moving TiddlyWiki 5 development to the TiddlyWiki organization. And I think that's a question that we need to consider because, again, it's a massive backwards incompatible change.
No, I think it's not backwards incompatible. I think it's different, but the output is exactly the same.
Mario, I'm sorry, you're looking at it from a technical perspective. Thinking about the project, any change to the infrastructure of the project is a big deal. So yes, we understand what technical capabilities we need in order to be able to do this. But for instance, scattering TiddlyWiki so that the parts are in lots of separate repos has huge implications. I've encountered other projects that are like that, and there's a whole another sense in which it's hard to navigate them because you don't know if you've seen all the stuff. You see a long, undifferentiated list of repos on the organization page on GitHub, and it's very hard to know where the project begins and ends, and experiments take over. Some of the repos aren't sort of canonically part of the project. So no, this is a huge change, and each of the changes that we need to make, so both the changes that you've considered here and the further changes, need to be really carefully considered. And as I say, it's not obvious to me that we should execute the move any of our repos to the TiddlyWiki organization.
Yeah, but I think it can be done relatively easy. Yeah, and also the manageability.
But I think you're looking at the ease of the wrong thing. I think you're looking at the ease of the person who's making the changes. That's not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with the ease for all the other people in the project. Yeah.
But
how easy it is for them to reorientate themselves.
There is every repo can have a README. Yeah? Then it tells you which are the contributors, or which is the group or the team or however you name it, which is responsible for this this part of the repo.
But it's not obvious to me that that's a good solution. The feeling that in order to understand the layout of a project that I have to navigate from a whole load of identical looking GitHub READMEs is also very problematic. So I that I'm continually concerned with backwards compatibility and so on. I've become scared of change. That there's a lesson in open source development. Even quite benign changes that you make have consequences that you don't see at the beginning.
Yeah, but we have one really big problem at the moment. It is really hard to get something into the main repository because everything which is a pull request needs to be reviewed by you and has to be merged by you. Yeah? So this language part, we can drive out all the language part immediately. So there is the French version, there is the Chinese version.
I understand your enthusiasm for this solution, but
you can make a group, and this group is independent, and we don't need your pull requests, and we just publish it.
Merit. So look, I understand your enthusiasm for this solution. What I'm saying is that it's a big change, so therefore it needs careful consideration.
Yes.
And we need to look at it, as I say, not from the point of view of how easy it is to do the change, but in terms of its impact on the rest of the community. And I also think that some of the details need to be looked at very carefully. So what combination of GitHub pages accounts we're using to host the content, how we are building TiddlyWiki Classic, whether TiddlyWiki Classic continues on its own subdomain, whether we do split things up into separate repos. We could also keep things in the same repo with other collaborators that were able to accept pull requests. Plus, so that's why I think this is a big topic, and doing it isn't the hard part.
Yeah, but I think that there are some changes. I did consider what do we need to do with TiddlyWiki Classic? What do we need to do with the main page? I have considered also, as I built this structure for the language, I have considered all these questions, and the thing is, it's easy. There have to be some rules, that's right, but the main concern is, well, my concern is the CNames file for GitHub, because in this case we are dependent on how GitHub resolves this CName.
Look, Mary, I'm sorry, but you're focusing on a very specific problem. That problem only occurs if we make certain decisions in terms of GitHub hosting. You may be confident that all of the other logic that leads you there is robust and there's no need to question it. But I'm not yet ready to jump to how do we fix that CName problem, because I think there's a whole load of interrelated things. Now, for instance, the fact that TiddlyWiki Classic is in a separate GitHub Pages account. The reason why that is so that Eric and I could work independently of each other without stepping on each other's toes in the early days of TiddlyWiki 5 when I didn't properly understand GitHub. So any workarounds we do now for that structure of having TiddlyWiki in a separate repo, to me, I question whether we want to continue that structure, because, as I say, it was brought in just to make life easier at the time, and now it's a different time, and it doesn't necessarily make life easier to do things like that. But as I said, the big change that I'm most concerned about is splitting up into separate repos. There's clearly we can do everything that you demonstrated while keeping TiddlyWiki and all of its parts in the same repo. We could do that. And so we can't argue that splitting it into separate repos is a sort of, well, maybe it is a technical necessity, but we need to do it for the right reasons, not just, and as I say, the main reasons would be around the community. Now, languages, maybe it's easy, maybe only people who are interested in a particular language need to find the repo, I don't know. And so some of what I was describing about repo splits is really about splitting the documentation out of the core code. That's the much more profound change. But even moving the languages out shifts us away from this philosophical position of TiddlyWiki's self-containedness does apply to the Node.js edition as well as the HTML.
We can keep all the structure if GitHub allows us to create write access on a subdirectory. I think that's not the case. Yeah? GitLab does.
Well, but then you see the assumption there is that we want to do fine-grained access control, and it's not obvious to me that we do need that fine-grained access control. You know, I mean, I trust everybody who's in the core team to do the right thing. I don't trust myself or anybody else not to make mistakes, but we can always sort out mistakes. Mm-hmm. So it may be that, you know, I'm absolutely with you. What the primary motivation for splitting things up into different repos is so that we can have different permissions on them. But given the complexity that it introduces to the project, it makes me question even whether we need that level of permissioning.
Yeah, but maybe there is one problem. I have, as I said the last time, there are several people which would like to contribute to the German version and only to the German version. and if they have write access to the core, this wouldn't work.
Well, maybe they'd have to have write access to a beta of the German version, you know, and that we keep the canonical German copy still in the core.
Yeah, but why should we split? Why should we split the content?
What I'm questioning is, because the implications of splitting the repos up are so deep, I'm questioning that what I'm seeing, I guess, as being slightly easy logic that says that, you know, this is what we should do. So I'm questioning it because that's what I mean by thinking about it carefully. And as I said, maybe let me just see. Tobias is saying each core plugin should be in its own repo, for instance. So there's some differences of opinion here that we need to explore. Distinct aspects in their own repos, Toby is saying in sidebar.
Yeah, the point is, okay, there is so much more to say. So if you have time, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, I'll come up and we talk in person.
Well, that would be great fun. I'd love to do that. I mean, as I say, we've got to get this right, and we've only got one chance. Infrastructure changes, of all the things that we can work on, they're some of the most thankless in a way, you know, because it kind of disappears. It doesn't really improve the product. So if we're going to do this, then let's get it right. And as I say, where I am in my logic at the moment is that we need to split the docs out into a separate repo for roughly the same logic as you've got. But as I say, following through the ramifications of that, they're really profound.
Yeah, I know.
So
I also had a lot of concerns, and I don't know. So I did restructure the whole thing. I don't know, 3 or 4 times. Then thinking about the access rights and all this stuff. I don't know, for about 3 months already. Yeah, and that there are some implications, but the things that we can gain are really huge. For example, there's one page which I've...
But Mario, I think here you're arguing in favor of a change. So we all agree with that. That what's going on here is just caution about the change, and I want to make sure. So let me try and put the debate in a more positive terms. You know, one thing we could do, for instance, is just adopt a really simple idea that plugins and additions get their own repos, and then make it so that the languages are plugins and additions, so that the engineering that you've applied to languages and the fact that there's a special languages homepage becomes, you know, kind of pulled up a level and becomes more generally applied. So that would be just be an example of a kind of higher level policy that we can reason about. And then if we treat the documentation as one of the options for how we handle the documentation is to treat it as a core plugin. And then issuing updates to the documentation becomes the same process as issuing updates to any other plugin. So we can accelerate and we need to, in order to be able to do the third-party plugin library properly, we need to massively improve our processing of plugin upgrades. So there's a lot of sort of moving parts that have some strange interchangeability, things that we choose different options and they help us with other goals that we're trying to pursue at the same time. But let me try to structure things a little. The questions so one question we have is about splitting the core into different repos. Another question we have is, do we move TiddlyWiki 5 from the Germaline organization on GitHub, or the Germaline account on GitHub, to the TiddlyWiki account? What we certainly cannot do is where we are with the current set of experiments, where we've got some components of TiddlyWiki 5 being in the github.com/TiddlyWiki and some components being in github.com/Germaline. So we've got to figure that one out and I'm concerned that, again, if we move it, it does seem to make a lot of things more smoother, but it does also make us very dependent, for instance, on GitHub's ability to maintain those redirects and so on, so that we don't break existing code and existing forks. That very specific question about what we do with the docs. We also have a problem at the moment that when we update the pre-release, when we add a new feature, we try and update the documentation as well. So that means that the documentation, the latest version of the documentation is actually the pre-release documentation that includes material that is only relevant for the pre-release.
Yeah.
So I think we need to adopt a macro that marks the version number from which or to which a chunk of content is applicable, and then by referring to the current version, basically explicitly tags stuff that's on the next version, but doesn't bother to explicitly tag or doesn't make visible the marking for content that is for an older version.
Yeah.
This Travis thing, I think we're all imagining the same thing, really, that we've got one mother of all build processes that pulls material in from a bunch of different GitHub repos and builds all of the static files, and the triggers can come from multiple repos, is quite important, so that the people who have permission to prompt a build, to trigger a build, if you see what I mean, don't necessarily need to have permission to do anything particular on any of the TiddlyWiki repos.
Yeah. I also think a build should only update what it builds. For example, if I want to change a German documentation page, it should only update the German documentation page and not everything. At the moment, so my script does a hard push for everything, but this is not necessary. So you can say, okay, just exchange this one page. In my case, it's a static page. So you can say, okay, just exchange this one page, and you are done. Because then you don't have to fear that that something else is destroyed. So that there shouldn't be a big build that builds everything, except if you make a new core version. So if you have a new core version, then in normal case everything should be rebuilt with the existing tag. Yeah.
You're talking about incremental builds. You want to be able to.
So the documentation should be completely independent from the core version. So everything which is documentation should be independent of the core version, except if it describes the core. So
yeah, I think when you're talking like this, I would urge you to just take one step further generalization. That all this language stuff, they're special cases of additions and plugins.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't let languages start becoming their own thing within TiddlyWiki, if you see what I mean. As in something that we need to cater for and build infrastructure for. The languages should be literally using all the same infrastructure as the other similar mechanisms.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah? And the infrastructure looks always the same. So we can define something like it's called, for example, npm install. It's everything the same. Or npm, I don't know, deploy. Yeah. So then for everything. There is only one command, and depending on where you make it, does the right thing. And it can also be, everything can be automated also for someone. If someone forks all this stuff, then they can publish their pre-releases onto their GitHub account. So it's completely independent of TiddlyWiki.com. So, for example, I can say, okay, pmario@github.io language, and then I have a pre-release, and I can see how it works. Completely independent. It's just a throwaway version for me to test something. So if it's not possible to test it locally, but as you could see, local tests could be relatively simple, so that I can really test if I broke something, I can see it locally even before I make a push. And then if I make a push, everything is built automatically into a pre-release, and then I can have a look at the pre-release, or someone else can have a look at the pre-release. And then if everything is okay, I create the pull request, and if the pull request is accepted, then everything which is affected will be rebuilt and published. So this
okay.
can be done.
let me pick up a couple of things from the sidebar. Tobias says, one question, maybe, can we devise an aggregate repo? And I think I know what you mean there. So GitHub does have, I can't remember the phrase for it, but you can have these sort of nested repos where one repo is kind of included inside another.
Yeah,
but they're
tricky. Every workflow.
They're tricky to use and probably more trouble than they're worth.
Yeah.
But it's a general case of really the problem here that just to reiterate that the great thing about TiddlyWiki on GitHub at the moment is that you don't need to understand GitHub to use it. You can just download that one zip file that you get at germline/TiddlyWiki5. And so sadly, I don't think that there's a seamless way to make it look to those people like there's a single repo, whilst we get the benefits of finer granularity of multiple repos. So fear, whatever we do has to be very explicit. So one of the things I think I may have said is we will need to adopt a very clear naming convention for these repos. So we will not have a repo called something like languages. It needs to probably have a TW5 qualifier, just to make it easier for people to make sense of the enormous list of repos that is going to be one of the consequences of this reorganization.
Yeah, but this also makes managing the URIs really complicated.
What does?
The GitHub, so if you name something, for example, TiddlyWiki 5 underline languages, then the subdirectory has to be TiddlyWiki 5 languages. Otherwise, you always have to define a CNAME, and everything which is splitted makes the management amount, which is needed, much more. So if we could use the GitHub default settings, would be really nice.
I'm not quite understanding. I'm talking about a naming convention for the names of the repos.
Yeah, but if you want to have TiddlyWiki.com languages DE or something like this.
Sorry. I'm talking about the naming convention for the repos. So github.com/TiddlyWiki/.
If it's different to the URL, then the management is increasingly more.
Oh, we can't couple the repo names to the root that we use in the URLs when we build.
Obviously no, we can.
No, we mustn't do that. That's too much inflexibility. That's too tight coupling. We absolutely need far better levels of control than that.
Yeah, then we have.
I'm telling you, because those domain names are desperately important that we get those right, but so are the GitHub names, and we can't couple them together because it's impossible. The requirements are so different. It would be impossible to make a good name that worked in both contexts.
Yeah, but then you cannot have subdirectories in the domain name because GitHub doesn't allow it. So if you define a CNAME,
I'm not asking for subdirectories. I'm asking for a convention for the repo names, for instance, TW5- and then the name of the repo. So that's if we were moving repos to the TiddlyWiki organization. Plugin - name of plugin, language - name of plugin, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but then you can only work with subdomains. So you can have you only can have language.
Sorry, why do subdomains come into what?
Because GitHub doesn't allow it. You cannot define.
Allow what? Doesn't allow what?
You can if you name your repo TiddlyWiki 5 -languages. You can only have with GitHub.io the URI which can be created can only be TiddlyWiki 5 -languages.tiddlywiki.com. Because you cannot define a CNAME which defines a subdirectory for the URL. That's not possible because I tried it.
So you're saying that if somebody wants to hang on, I think what you're trying to say. No, this doesn't make sense to me though, because the domain name restriction is on the repo you're using for GitHub pages.
Yes, there you have now that there are several.
So mine's germline.github.io. It doesn't have the name of a repo in it, and if I have a repo called TW5- something or other, I don't see why that has a bearing.
Because if you have a new repo which has the name TiddlyWiki5-languages, then you need to define a CNAME to get the URL.
But why? I don't understand. Why would you have a URL for the repo that contains
because
the source?
Because you need to tell GitHub how it should serve it.
But GitHub's not serving each individual language repo. It's serving a single repo, isn't it? Or am I misunderstanding how you're trying to structure?
I think there is some misunderstandings. Yeah. So I want to have in this case every repo has its own GitHub pages, which is completely independent from the core.
You're talking about using the GH pages.
Yes.
Branch.
Yeah. And that's
why would we do that?
Yeah, because otherwise we have. If I make a little change, I have to rebuild the whole TiddlyWiki.com. I don't want to rebuild TiddlyWiki.com if I just want to change one page of the German documentation.
But well, we can make the build process more incremental so that it knows to build less. But splitting it up into lots of GitHub pages repos doesn't really help that anything, I don't think. Why wouldn't we just continue as we are at the moment with a single repo that maps to GitHub pages? Why is it complicated? It means, for instance, one of the great things about it, and it came up in the group just recently, is I can point people at it and say, there, download that zip file, you've got the entire TiddlyWiki.com file, all the files off TiddlyWiki.com. It's quite handy that it's a single repo that access GitHub page. I mean, does access the repo. Sorry, it's the hosting for the entire site.
Yeah, but you still can make a TiddlyWiki.zip file which contains everything. This is not the problem.
I would say product is the way we're structured at the moment.
Yeah, there are several things. I think we have a little bit different view and a little bit different understanding. So that's why I think
I now understand exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to take advantage of the way that repos with a GH pages branch all appear as subfolders of the main GitHub pages URL for that repo. And so you want to use that, and of course now I understand why you meant that the repo name is going to appear in the subdirectory. But as I say, that's not on. We can't have that restriction on how we publish TiddlyWiki.com. We need complete flexibility about how we structure it. And I don't see that. You see, with a single repo, you're right that the update process, there's an opportunity for it to be smart and do a minimal incremental update. But the great thing is, it's only the Travis CI bot that needs to have access to that repo. So there's no permissions problem there. People push to their repo, that triggers Travis CI build bot. It may or may not be smart enough to realize that all that's changed is a language and it can do a partial rebuild. Who knows? But whether it does or not, it will. It's only it needs write access to the single GitHub pages repo.
Yeah, it's possible. Possible that way, no problem. But
so look, let's what I was going to say about the next steps is what I think we've demonstrated is that although there's an admirable simplicity to the experiments that you've been able to do so far, the next steps are not simple to decide. So I think we need to create a ticket that summarizes exactly what we plan to do before we do it. So all of the changes to the current TiddlyWiki infrastructure. Maybe if you start that ticket, Mario, then you can keep editing the top post, if you see what I mean, to keep it up to date with the ensuing discussion. And then let's break it down into goals and tasks, I guess. And then we can bash it out there. But yes, a very useful discussion. I certainly understand more clearly what you're trying to do there with the multiple GitHub pages repos.
Yeah.
Okay, so we must maintain our momentum on this because you have done the hard part. So one of the things I'll be looking for is just what are the simplest steps that'll get us these two. You've got a set of goals in terms of language publishing. I've got a set of goals in terms of the main documentation updates. and let's try and figure out the quickest way that we can get that stuff moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to show that it's possible to create something that works for contributors in a relatively easy way, so that so we can reduce it to, let's say, I don't know, a handful of simple commands, so that they can start contributing, yeah? And that everything can be automated based on pull requests, based on merge requests, so that we can really automatically build the whole stuff. So this is technical proof of concept. How we do it exactly, yeah, we need to discuss it. That's why I only did the languages stuff, because I didn't want to do too much and throw everything away. So I did. Yeah.
No, I think that's the right thing.
Show it.
And I mean, and as I say, although I think we need to discuss the splitting up in separate repos, for what it's worth, your conclusion about the need to put the languages in the repo in separate repos from a permission point of view matches my logic. But I think we're disagreeing about having them, separate GitHub Pages repos. But we can figure that one out.
I don't have a problem with it if we can define it with a permission system that exists on GitHub. So there is no at the moment. I think it's only possible to have fine-grained access control on a repo basis.
Absolutely. So to be clear, where we're closing this conversation is the idea that we're moving towards sticking with a single GitHub Pages repo. A build process that is driven by a number of separate repos that have a naming convention, and aggregates content from those repos. And to be clear, we're talking about each plugin and each edition, and I guess probably each theme having its own repo. And there's the discussion in the sidebar about it suggests that. We need to make sure that everybody understands the implications, and I think we'll need to, because it's such a big transition, we're going to need to do a good job of communicating it and explaining it to people so they feel comfortable in with the new layout.
Yeah.
Jeremy, from my standpoint, okay, I have not really warmed up to GitHub. I use it in a minimal kind of a way. I don't fully comprehend all of the subtleties of projects, organizations, repos, GitHub pages, etc. Now, I certainly can understand all of that stuff. I'm a technical guy. There are plenty of people, though, who look at GitHub and say this is some sort of magic foo that's happening, and I'm not really sure how to use this properly. I followed the recipe, the formula for how to use GitHub. I hope I did it right, but if you start getting into the subtleties of which repo and where does it go and how does it get named and everything, the end result of the discussion between you and Mario, which is very complex about all the sophisticated use of this service, the end result has still got to be something that can be explained to a uninitiated community participant in a way that they'll go, oh, all right, I just do this command and everything's okay. I don't have to learn how GitHub works in order to use it.
Yes.
Because I'm a technical guy, and even after banging my head against it for a couple of years, I'm still not comfortable using GitHub in the way that it's obviously intended to be used.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I'm concerned to make sure. I mean, basically, because we only use GitHub in a very simple way, we've lowered the barriers to entry to TiddlyWiki, but we have also made life more complicated for ourselves because everything Mario's talked and I've talked about is actually very standard for other projects, and it maybe it goes back to an issue that I said an issue, but a distinctive characteristic about TiddlyWiki that's one of my favorite things, which is that so many people involved in it are not actually software developers, and so
I think one big advantage of GitHub is that you can host your pages for free. Yeah? They even create them. And I think that that's the main goal. So if you want to host everything on your own server, then you have the complete freedom how you structure it. But then you have to pay for the server. That's it. That's the only difference.
You're saying that GitHub is almost as good as the server you run yourself, you mean?
No, I think GitHub is better than the server that runs on myself, because the server that I run myself, I have to manage myself and do all the security stuff and then DDoS protection and then whatnot.
And for those of you that don't know, GitHub is, although it's a centralized service owned by a company that has taken venture capital, and that company at the moment is in the grip of a huge controversy about the fact that GitHub is focusing more of their attention on their enterprise clients than on the open source projects that made their name. But despite all of this, so basically the industry is starting to kind of voice more and more concerns about our dependency on GitHub, the cultural dependency on GitHub. But the amazing thing is that Git itself is just decentralized enough that, if you don't know, if you have cloned TiddlyWiki with GitHub onto your own machine, then you have not just a snapshot of TiddlyWiki, but you have a clone of the entire development history with essentially everything that you see in the commit tab of github.com. So we're compared to, say, in a previous life where we used track and subversion, which were specialist tools for issue tracking and source code control, and we hosted them ourselves on track.tiddlywiki.org and svn.tiddlywiki.org. And those tools were a nightmare, partly because we had to worry about backing them up and so on. Whereas now with Git, so I've got, even if GitHub failed tomorrow, which seems unlikely, I've got a full backup on my machine, well, on every machine and all over the place.
There is also GitLab, which looks very similar to GitHub and has the same possibilities. Yeah. So Travis works as equal. Yeah. They have hosting capabilities and so on. And GitLab is open source, so everyone can host their own version if they want. So this is also possible. Absolutely no difference. A little bit.
I think we'll stick with the reason why we'll stick with GitHub for the moment is important. That GitHub is the majority popular vote. So for random people trying to get help on how do I do such and such, GitHub is the most widely used, most useful thing. And I think that should continue to be. TiddlyWiki itself is unusual enough without foisting anything too unusual in the ecosystem on people. And okay, so we should move on because this infrastructure stuff is arcane, a good word. So looking at the, I ought to just check to see if anybody's posted any questions in the Q&A app, and they have not. So the other topics, I think, why don't we pick up first with the questions that Scott raised, and then Jed, if you're still there, to move to you with the resume edition. Would that make sense?
Jeremy?
Oh, yes!
Yeah.
Eric, are you ready to do your demo?
I can do that. I was just going to say, if I don't do it now, I might fade out because.
Yeah, no, this is a great timing. So let me give a context for this. That Eric showed one of the delights of watching Eric work on InsideTiddlyWiki is that in more than one case he has been able to do things that I believe to be impossible, which is really critical. It's really good for me, if you see what I mean, because it keeps me, it keeps my brain in the right place to be, to be continually aware that there are other people that are more knowledgeable and more cunning than me is pretty good. And the technique, there's one particular technique, I don't know exactly, Eric sort of filleted some stuff to show you, so I'm not sure which of these techniques he's going to show, but it's pretty hot stuff.
Well, let me say this about the overall approach I take to developing in TiddlyWiki. My philosophy is that a lot of people. Oh, by the way, your mic's open. Yeah. Okay. My philosophy is that a lot of people will want to develop in TiddlyWiki but don't have all of this technical developer expertise. And so I try to use TiddlyWiki in its base form. I don't sort of like, I admire the way Tobias has gone and sort of said when he can't figure out a solution, especially he has said he doesn't particularly like writing wiki text macros because the syntax gives him a headache, and he resorts to going back to JavaScript. I don't mean that to say in a negative way at all. I'm just saying that he's more comfortable with writing code, and so for him, that's his solution to what to do with TiddlyWiki is I'll just write it in JavaScript and wrap it in a widget wrapper, and I'll be happy. My approach has been to say, okay, Jeremy has created a syntax. What can this syntax do? And it's almost sort of a computer science-y sort of exercise in what is this language capable of, and I'm trying to push those boundaries. And in the process, I'm discovering really interesting things. Like, as we all know, TiddlyWiki's syntax does not really lend itself to doing math, but it does lend itself to doing recursion, which is really a curious thing. You can't add numbers, but you can recurse like nobody's business. So anyway, let me see if I can screen share. And I guess I click over there. And I can share just that window. That would be very good, I think, for the moment at least. No, actually, I want to, well, I'll change my share at that point. Okay, am I sharing now?
10-4.
Yeah, we can see it.
Excellent. Okay, so let me juggle which window I'm on, which screen I'm on, so I can see better here. Okay. So this is the quote-unquote empty version of the InsideTiddlyWiki book. It's the framework of the book without the actual InsideTiddlyWiki content. It does have some content, which is why I said quote-unquote empty. So there's a lot of features in this, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but the one that Jeremy was most intrigued with the other day was a new thing I call SlideBars, which are, well, sidebars, but that they slide. So for example, if I move the cursor up to this SlideBar here, a SlideBar will pop out, and if I move to the side, it'll pop out from there, or it'll pop out from there, or it'll pop up from there. I also have some corner slide bars. This one brings down a few menu buttons on that side, and this one brings down some menu buttons on that side. So the slide bars allow you to sort of tuck things along the edges and have a hot hover zone that simply pulls it and slides it out. And of course, when you move away, it disappears. When you move over it, it appears. So there's a hot zone along the edge of the panel, and again, it has a hover effect on it, so when you move over the hot zone, the panel animates out when you move away. But if you want to keep that panel there, you simply click on the hot zone, and it locks it into place. In this case, it also moves the story river over to leave some room for the locked-in panel. If I lock the panel on the bottom, it doesn't move anything over, it simply locks it in place and keeps it on top of everything. So there's different ways to lock things. You can pin them, as I call them. So you can pin or unpin the sides, you can pin or unpin the top. You can even pin or unpin the menu buttons that come down so that you can keep them in place so they don't disappear. Personally, I like them the way they duck out of the view when you're not using them. So, for example, if I move into play here and then I hit the search button, then I get the drop down. And I have the slide bars have an idea of stay visible, which is that when a pop-up is shown that's coming from a slide bar, it will disable the hover effect so that it stays visible until the pop-up is dismissed. So as soon as I click somewhere to dismiss the pop-up, the slide bar vanishes along with it and comes back, of course, when you mouse over it. So that's the basics of a slide bar. Now, a slide bar is composed of several parts. There's the definition of where is it placed and how is it placed. There's the tray, which is the actual elements that are displayed. And then there's the style sheet, which controls all the hover effects and animation. And so Jeremy was particularly interested in how I had implemented that, because there's what I wanted to do is make it generic enough that you could create as many slide bars as you want. This particular document has the 4 sides plus the upper 2 corners, but I'm working on another document that has all 4 corners and all 4 sides as hot zones to it. So the first thing to show, well, first if I unlock this document, we can then go to the parts list. And if we look at the parts list here, let me just hide the contents parts. Okay, there's a section of slide bars, and it seems to be quite a long list. But it's actually divided up. The slide bars has a section of bars, buttons, and panels, and then a few other pieces. And so, for example, if we take a look at the left bar here, as it comes out, you can see it has a tree view of the document, and it's showing that we're in the parts list, etc. But this entire panel that pops out from the left side is one slide bar. And so if we take a look in the slide bar definitions, we'll see that there's a slide bars left. And if we take a look at the definition of bars left, we see it's actually, and this is what Jeremy was particularly interested in, is it's a bunch of defines. It's not very much except for defines, and at the very end, it's doing one transclusion. So if we take a quick look at what it defines, there's a whole bunch of things. For example, this upper section here refers to various tiddler content. For example, I'm pointing to a configuration tiddler that uses it's a data tiddler, and it uses a number of fields to define various settings like backgrounds of slide bars, or what the H margin and V margin values should be, or what the font size of the toolbar is as a percentage. So the first set of defines here is pulling values out of tiddler's settings. The next set of defines here are particular to this bar that's being defined, and I needed various kinds of symbols and IDs, so I have a bar ID, which is unique, and then a bar name, which is used in the CSS, and a bar class, and then a bar tag, and a bar label, and then a pin and unpin. So I have a number of different defines here that relate to what this particular bar is. Then there's a number of flags and settings that are, again, extracted from the configuration file, the configuration tiddler, I should say. Bar stay, bar hover, bar size, bar font size. So again, I'm defining a whole bunch of variables related to where the bar should, how the bar should behave, and linking them back to the source values of where those are coming from in tiddlers. Then I define a range of values, top, left, bottom, right, width, height, min, max, z, and z hover for the bar. And so I'm defining all of these. Now these are bits and pieces of CSS. It can, in fact, it can be bundled as a plugin. None of my stuff is currently bundled as a plugin, but I will show you how easy it is to just move a couple of tiddlers over. They will be bundled as plugins when they're finally published. This is sort of almost ready for publishing, but not quite there yet. Anyway, so I have a tiddler called bars left, which is the definition of all the variables that make up this left side bar. The bar position and size, the tray position size, and these are CSS values that are being done here. Notice, for example, though, that I'm retrieving H margin from a tiddler up here, and I'm using the conditional transclusion that says if it doesn't exist, fall back to have a fallback value, because without a fallback value, the CSS would be invalid. So this is a transclusion with a fallback for the H margin, and then lower down here where I'd say what is the bar width of the left bar? It's 1 H margin, and so I nest things around. Display none. What's the? I'm not sure what that comment means in the text. It says display.
Oh,
anyway.
It's not to do with what you're doing.
Oh, all right. Oh, something else aside conversation. Gotcha. Okay. Anyway, so this tiddler, which defines the left bar, is just a set of macro definitions, and you can in fact say they're not really macros so much as they are variables, because none of them have any parameters to them.
Yes, it's as if they together are parameters for the transclusion, and it reminds me of something that I think is an omission in TiddlyWiki 5, which is that there should be syntax for a parameterized transclusion. Part of the reason why there isn't is because we've got parameterized macro invocations, and I think I've probably mused with you all before that I think that was a mistake. That there should have been one mechanism. There's two very similar mechanisms, transcluding a tiddler and transcluding a variable. There really should be just one. And I think the pattern that you've got here, where you're parameterizing a transclusion, just feels right from a modularity point of view, I guess.
Well, it lends itself to some very interesting reuse of code. Because as you can see, here's the parameters for the left bar, and it has things like, well, where is the top and where is the left and the bottom, and these values can of course change. Each bar placement would be different. The way the slide bars work is there's a bar element, which is sort of like, well, if you were hanging a door in your house, you'd screw the hinges onto the door frame, and so the bar element is the part that you screw down and attach to the page. And then the tray element lives inside of it and slides in and out. So the bar definition here, these first values here, this defines where it's attached to the page. And then the second definition defines where the tray is relative to the attachment to the page. Because the tray could be sliding left and right, the tray could be sliding up and down, it could even be sliding at an angle. So there's the definition of the bar and the tray, and then of course here's the way for instance, the left bar slides to the left and right, and so it fades in and out, and it has a shift of the margin left. But the right bar would have a different definition for what the tray show and hide is. Now, let's take a look. After all of these definitions are done, it transcludes the SlideBars tray. So if we take a look at the tray, and we take a look at what it's defined as, this is much more conventional wiki text. First, it starts with a wrapper that says test to see if there are any items with the indicated bar tag. Now here's the first use of one of those variables. Bar tag was defined in that previous tiddler we were looking at as a tag value. It's $:/tags/left slide bar. And so this filter is now saying, well, whatever the value of bar tag defined outside of this tiddler, whatever its value is, we're going to make sure that there's at least one tiddler with that tag in order to render anything. So the outer list wrapper here is simply suppressing the rendering if there is nothing with that tag. But then it goes on, the next line here says, well, we're going to create a wrapper around the entire output, which is going to be of a particular CSS class, which is again defined external to this wiki content. So that, well, what's the wrapper? It's whatever the bar class was in the invoking tiddler, in the transcluding tiddler. And similarly, here's a reveal that looks at the bar stay value. And then the output of what to do for that button top is the bar pin. But of course, if the bar stay is the other way, then it's going to have a button that shows you the bar unpin text. And what does it do? Well, the bar pin and unpin actually sets the bar name flag to either yes or no. And what config file does it set? And what index does it set? Those are the parameters, config and bar name, again, defined in the initial transcluding tiddler. So this is a sort of a template, but it's a template not driven by field values in the current tiddler. It's a template driven by the current scoped variables. And so this is the basic template of a single bar: is make an element of that bar class, have a toggle button in it which either toggles the bar on or off, and then here's the bar tray, the part that slides in and out. And the bar tray is composed of a series of panels which are whatever is tagged with the appropriate tag. So it populates the tray by looking for anything that's tagged with whatever the tag was that was defined. And again, if we go back to the definition, we'll see that up here I defined bar tag as that. So whatever is tagged with left slide bar will appear in the tray of the left slide bar. So there's the definition of it. And then we have the tray, which is the wiki text for rendering. But then the more intriguing part is the style sheet that does all of the display animation. And for that, we're going to the styles. This is very similar to the tray. Here's another tiddler, which is using all of those variables. And here we see I'm simply declaring a .bar class. Whatever the class name was that was defined in that variable, that's the class I'm defining in this style sheet. And what am I defining as? Well, look, bar top, bar left, bar bottom, bar right. So I'm basically setting a bunch of CSS rules based upon a bunch of variables that were defined in that initial definition tiddler. So here's the style template, if you will. Again, it's a template, but it's drawing off of values that are in variables. And so the definition of the slide bar, the definition of the tray inside the slide bar, the panel, the pin button, which is the toggle on and off, all of these different elements, again, they're simply referencing, they're all part of the bar class definition for that particular class. So each individual invocation can define a different set of CSS. And then there's some stuff here for doing transitions and animations and what to do on hover. And there's rules for what to do if you're on a tablet versus a regular desktop and things. So all of this CSS here, even, for instance, the transition rules have slide bar in and out rules, which are defined up here as the transition animation effects, so that they can be easily modified here. So there's a lot of parameterizing of things to make it easy to replicate and reuse. And this style template, though, how does it become a style sheet, is also very intriguing. This is the last big piece of it here. The SlideBar style sheet. Oops, sorry, wrong one. I found the wrong tiddler. Let's try again there. Ah, that's why. There were two of them. Different. Okay, here's the SlideBars style sheet, which what it does is first it does a loop. It says for every tiddler tagged as a slide bar, import all the variables from that tiddler, and then transclude that styles template. So what's tagged with slide bar is the definition. The definition of the slide bar is tagged as a slide bar. It's also attached to the page template because it is the bolt down point for the slide bar, but it's tagged as a slide bar so that all the variables it defines can be found, and when you get to the building of the style sheet that is tagged as a style sheet, it's tagged as a style sheet, and what it does is it says find everything that's tagged as a slide bar, import all the variables from it, and then transclude that styles template. So this is loading up all the styles. And then I have a few extra styles that it throws in just for good measure. So the result of this is that it's tagged as a style sheet. So this is the CSS that gets loaded. And now you can see, for instance, the common rules for each slide bar. And then it says, well, this one's the bar's bottom. And then there's bottom left, bottom right. And if we find the one that's here, here's the one for bars left. There's the set of variables we have been looking at. And as you can see now, the rules are now fully filled in with whatever the various variables had been, 0, 42, all the constants, all the calculations that were done in that first tiddler we looked at with all the defines are now inserted into the style sheet for its definitions. And so each of these different slide bars has a different set of parameters for where its left and right and top and bottom and positioning is, but they all follow the same style sheet template, but they will have different values, you know. So the top bar here, and these calcs are based upon the transclusions that were done. So for instance, if we take a look at the left bar's top value, it says calc of 42px times 150 divided by 100. Now that seems like a very odd little calculation to do. But if we go back to the definition of that slide bar in the left definition here, we'll find that the definition of bar top was a calc of v margin times toolbar size divided by 100. Now toolbar size is the font size as a percentage, so this is the fractional value of the as a percentage, so it's a point something, and then you're multiplying the v margin, so this is scaling the top bar by 1, and of course v margin was derived from up here, where it retrieved it from a config file and has a fallback value of 2.5 ems. So, and then, let's see, there's one last place to look, which is the actual config file, where I'm getting these values from. And here's that tiddler, and as you can see, there's various values like background slide bars, or V margin and H margin are defined there. So these are the and this is for all the slide bars in this document. It has one big data tiddler that defines the current arrangement of all those slide bars. And so for each bar, there's whether it's shown or not, whether it has hover capability, what size it should be, and it has a default calculation, and what label it should use, and has a default label. So, but these are all so combination of this configuration tiddler plus these other tiddlers, and you get the left bar, the right bar, etc. So these are all the parts. Now I want to show you how these parts can be used in a very powerful little demo here. Let me just reload this page, and I'm going to finish the demo with this last bit here. So first thing I'm going to do is open up TiddlyWiki.com. Hello there, it says. Okay, now we see that it starts out with the Contents tab shown on the left, and that's fine, but I think I'd rather have the Contents tab shown in a slide bar on the left side of the window. So let's see what it will take to actually make that happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is just and you probably can't see this part because I'm not sharing both screens, but I'm just going to go to the parts.
Eric, how many tiddlers are you going to be dragging? Because I think we should.
Only about 5.
Well, go on then, because
okay.
I do think we probably need to go on.
Yes, exactly. And let me just get those tiddlers grabbed and over here. So I'm going to grab the styles and that style sheet that aggregates them, and the tray. Those are the pieces of the slide bars itself. And I'm going to grab the bars left definition. And that, and just for appearances purposes, I'm going to grab one of my generic TiddlyTool style sheets with some adjustments to some CSS. But that's not required, it's just to make it look nicer. I'll import those, and nothing has happened. Although it looks like I modified the tiddler background a little bit. Don't worry about that.
Your style sheet.
Yeah, but that was a minor tweak. That's all. That's adjustments. All right. So nothing has shown up. There's no slide bar here. That's because we haven't provided a definition yet. So let's take that bars left. We need to have something that's actually going to be a bar. So I have one prepared, a table of contents bar. And if we take a look at what's in it, it's essentially a div with some styling wrapped around a transclusion of the table of contents tiddler. So it's a very simple, make the table of contents tiddler look a little prettier. And this is what it does. It puts a heading at the top in here, and it puts it in a little shadowed, rounded, cornered bubble. Now the thing is, if I take this panel here and I were to tag it with ags left sidebar, get rid of that little off there. Okay, so it's tagged as left sidebar, and as soon as I do that, this appears. And there it is. And there it is.
That's
and
that's
it folds, and it, of course, if I click it, it'll lock in place, and it'll stay there. If I expand a tree on it, it will expand. It'll change its size to fit, and if there's not enough room, it'll actually make sure that it doesn't exceed the page and stays with this nice little scrolling area. And I can leave it on the side there. Of course, I could do the same thing with the sidebar itself, but here now I can look at the whole page, pop up my text, navigate around the help, dismiss the help when I want to, or I can just go over there, let it slide out without locking it in place, scroll down to something, click on it, and when I move away, it dismisses itself. When I come back, it's there, still in the same scroll position, waiting for me to go and do something else.
great. Eric, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to, Tobias, Jed, you're churning out complex wiki text. That technique that we saw so clearly that Eric was using of lots of single line macro definitions and then a transclusion. Do either of you use it? Do you think about things in those terms? Oh, and Jed's back. Tobias, question for you there, then. Oh, no, Tobias, we've got no volume for you. Jed, are you back again?
Yes.
Jed just reported in the sidebar the dog decided to sit on the mouse.
Speaking from the less accomplished TiddlyWiki user perspective, I certainly write a lot of one-line macros and then build more complex macros out of those. I don't know if that's a good habit or a bad habit I've cultivated.
I think it's a good habit. I think that the core has too many very, very, very long macros that would benefit from being broken down and be a bit simpler to understand.
This is a bit different than a macro, though.
Yeah.
Although they take the syntax form of a macro, they're really more variables because they don't really have parameter passing and substitution.
The same thing, but we don't often. It's odd. The fact they're the same thing is very seldom visible to users. It's quite weird.
But it's extremely convenient that they are.
Yeah.
Because there's places where, for example, so what I'm doing with these macros is using them as variable names, just for the purpose of substitution.
Well, I think they're parameter names, just to say, really, aren't they? I mean, they're better than that because I noticed some of the later ones refer to some of the earlier ones, so they're kind of.
Curiously, by the way, later versus earlier doesn't matter because the expansion will happen whether they're defined ahead or it doesn't. The order of the definition doesn't matter. They'll still because the macros are evaluated when they're referenced.
When the transclusion is actually when we actually wikify the contents. Yeah.
Right. Interestingly, I did find a distinction between using the double angle brackets in a macro versus using the $parens in the macro. The $parens is expanded immediately. And so the macro,
substitution.
So one is substitution. The other one is simply returning the macro, which will be expanded in place. This was very important because in certain contexts, the double angle, the expanded later version wouldn't apply. Passing things around in style sheets is tricky that way because style sheets don't.
One of the more common things.
It depends on whether you're using the transclusion as a parameter value in a widget or using it inline as sort of constructing some CSS, for example. And especially in the case where the CSS was doing a calc and of some previous variables, once it was wrapped inside a calc, it was no longer something that could be transcluded and did another calc on. So there is some subtlety to how you define your variables. But what I found I was doing was first I would write a a single instance of what I wanted, like the tray, and I worked out how the tray was, and then I said, okay, now which of these things in these constants need to be made into parameters, and then I would go and do the /defines and move all the variables out and go, okay, it still works now with the variables moved, and then I was able to say, okay, now that this is generic, I can now change the variables and see whether or not it still works. And so I was able to discover that, well, just reversing the rights and the lefts doesn't help, because apparently there's this top left corner just anchoring thing. And so I had to figure out some other approach. So by parameterizing it, I was then able to try it in different configurations without having to edit the code each time to see how well it worked.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, Eric. I want to, just before we finish, pick up Scott's patient question. And I'm not sure if we'll get to a full answer, but it was about plugins within plugins. So I think your post on the group, Scott, was basically, can I make a plugin of all of the important plugins that I like to have in all my TiddlyWikis, then update that single plugin so that those plugins are available in all my wikis? Was that roughly it?
That's it in...
So I think what you want is your own plugin library. We talked a bit about... Go on, sorry.
Almost. Let me refine that just a tiny...
A local plugin library that you populate with plugins pulled from elsewhere, I mean. But it's local to you so that you don't need to be online to access it.
Sort of. I would also like that to include things other than merely plugins, such as my recurring TiddlyWiki settings, their personal preferences. So I'd like to take the config tiddlers that I always set when I create a new TiddlyWiki and tag them to what I'm calling, for the sake of communication, my personal core. So it would include those. It would include default style sheets with styles that I want to be available everywhere. It would include some core tiddlers that I have made minor modifications to, usually for appearance's sake or sometimes minor behaviors. It would include custom buttons that I have created to do recurring things throughout TiddlyWiki, like I have an enable and disable this plugin button that I show with plugins, so I don't have to manually create those tiddlers. I'd like to bundle all those things up into a package, into a single plugin that I could keep and edit in a TiddlyWiki, and then deploy just by dragging, dropping, and importing that to a new plugin. Or if someone else decided they wanted to debug something that I were doing, even, I could say, well, in case it's something that I'm not able to track down myself, you can essentially duplicate all my essentials over here. But what I'm concerned about are, will the plugins nested within plugins continue to function, especially if they're JavaScript plugins?
No, they don't, is the answer.
Oh, okay.
So the first part of what you're after is easy. It's to collect a bunch of tiddlers together into a plugin that you use in multiple wikis. That's the classic use case for building a plugin. So to make you happy on that, I think we need to make it easier to build plugins in the browser, which is something that we've made some progress on, and there's some obviously third-party plugins that have gone a lot further than the core does on that. But no, the trickier part is plugins, and plugins within plugins kind of could work in the way that you're expecting them to work, but it's actually most often incredibly useful that they work in the way that they do work. By that I mean that plugins putting a plugin within a plugin is one of the ways to kind of deactivate it so that it doesn't infect the wiki it's within, so that you can install it and so on. But what you're getting at of this idea of having some shared content between a bunch of wikis, I think is a use case that we really need to address. We've already identified that third-party plugin libraries, Tobias being able to maintain his own plugin library, is a great route to some of the other things we want in the community. So I think I'd be looking for, could we make what you need to do to run a plugin library just so simple that even people who want to do it just for themselves. So I love your idea of a personal core, partly because it sounds a bit like something that somebody would say to you in a yoga session. So there's something about self-improvement, improve your personal core. But it's a really nice idea, and I like the idea that there are modifications that you make to TiddlyWiki that are so routine that they become part of your version of the core. So there's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of like that's actually an addition in Jeremy's logic. So you have built a version of TiddlyWiki that's specific to you. So what my original thought was, we need to make the mechanism by which you save that and make it available to you, to Scott, be the same mechanism that makes it available to everybody else, so that there's this kind of sharing. And you see this, in fact, in programmer communities. There's sort of magic configuration files that, in many cases, programmers share as a matter of course, so that other programmers can look at them and suggest improvements, etc., and send pull requests and so on. So I like this idea that there are, we talk about a lot in the design of TiddlyWiki how the goal is for a small number of mechanisms to be endlessly combined and reused to give us all the functionality we need for TiddlyWiki to do what it does. And this, I think, is a great example where there's mechanisms that are partially implemented that potentially could fulfill this slightly different use case of Scott publishing his plugins so that they're conveniently available for him to use alone, being the same process that Tobias uses to publish his plugins that are widely used by half the people in the community. Really interesting if we can make those be the same process. Drive down the cost.
I hadn't considered that. Jed had suggested using his idea of tiddler bundles to share that way as well, and maybe this is just me being a little hidebound in my thinking. In my approach, I thought tiddler bundles, which really we should call schools, and I'm going to lobby so hard for that. But these schools of tiddlers I thought of as being content, not as being system tiddlers. Whereas most of the things that I'm wanting to push back and forth between TiddlyWikis are just config tiddlers.
The distinction between those things is actually something we need to work out, like with the whole Federation thing and tiddler bundles and all of that. It all needs to be the same thing.
Where we got to last week was that Jed is choosing a file format for his bundles with these little marker characters that uses a technique that we normally use for files that are manually generated. That's what that technique exists for. And so my suggestion was that it was a lumpy technique to be using here, where bundles are largely machine generated, generated through tooling rather than being typed. And then once you get over that distinction, that implementation issue, then we arrived at the idea that bundles, as Jed is conceiving them in his work, could be plugins. And I was putting it more firmly than that. For Jed's federation work to be suitable for the core, they need to be plugins, because the core can't afford to spontaneously breed additional concepts that don't have, that don't need to exist. So I think we're on pretty good ground there after the discussion we had last time.
While we're on the topic, though, there is the plugins within plugins causes an issue with plugin functionality. But there is another question I have about how TiddlyWiki processes things that maybe we could address really quickly, which is about the order of execution when dealing with those things. For example, I have a TiddlyWiki. It has the core set of tiddlers. Then it's got, what I was calling my personal core with all of its stuff in there as well. Let's say there's a core tiddler that defines some function. We'll say it's not JavaScript, so we ignore that possible conflict. Then my core has a replacement for that, Shadow. And then I have a TiddlyWiki where I've decided for this and this TiddlyWiki only, I've opened that tiddler, edited it, and saved it as a non-shadow tiddler. All three of those exist as strings of text in the TiddlyWiki in the HTML file, but is mine that I've created as a full-fledged tiddler dominant over the others?
Your full-fledged tiddler will always be dominant. So the situation you were describing was two shadow tiddlers and a normal tiddler.
Exactly.
So the normal tiddler will always obliterate the shadows.
And then if I delete that full-fledged tiddler, then does the shadow from my personal core override the shadow from the core?
Exactly, and the mechanism by which that happens is via a mysterious and seldom used mechanism called plugin priority. So plugins can have a field called plugin-priority that is used to determine the order in which plugins are loaded. It's a bit of a hack, and the way things work at the moment, I think only the core plugin includes a plugin priority field, so we ensure that the core plugin is overridable by other plugins.
What's the value for that? Higher, lower?
I can't remember.
But I could go look at the core.
We can investigate. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to drop off for 1 second. I'll be back momentarily.
But yes, just because it was brought up a minute ago, and I was going to say, as far as like tiddler bundles go, the idea for that, like right now, I am using it for my specific narrow Twitteration thing, and before I had started working on that, it was just to move content from one thing to another. What needs to happen in a more general sense is we need to have a generic tiddler container that a plugin will be one type of that, and then a content bundle or school will be one type of that, and then something that contains even more things will be another type of that. And it is a generalization of what plugins currently are, not it needs to be a generalization of what plugins currently are, not a separate thing. Maybe the separate thing was actually a mistake on my part.
I see.
Also, I like the posters.
I remember when you were talking earlier on about creating bundles, and man, we so need to call those schools.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, non-native English speakers.
Oh, of course they're going to lose the pun.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, it's just a shame. You've crushed my spirit, Jed.
I know, I was very sad.
I'm so disappointed. But I remember when you were talking about that earlier. Yeah, that would. I transitioned out of into thinking that way from in TiddlyWiki Classic, what I had adopted from Eric as calling packages for specific clients or specific tasks. I would just tag a whole bunch of tiddlers together as my client A package, and with the import-export functionality in TiddlyWiki Classic, I could just throw those to another tiddler or another TiddlyWiki as easily as anything else. But yeah, like as Tobias had mentioned, Swarm earlier, I'd forgotten that one. I was so fixated on schools as the perfect name, but it had never occurred to me you would lose the pun.
It is unfortunate.
I think the thing to me about these words, swarm, bundle, school, etc., is when we think about federation, the really interesting stuff is at the user interface layer, is how we build conventions between us that allow us to collaborate. And so I think we will need to name things thinking, at the moment we're thinking about the mechanisms, and so my reaction to the discussion about bundles is in terms of the mechanisms that we've got in the TiddlyWiki core at the moment, how we can reuse them and so on. But I think actually one of the components, one of the things going on with this word bundle is a much more important high-level notion of the idea of a set of items that you decide to share. And that's to me, the layering is, there's a kind of low-level thing about these things are all JSON files, they're currently called plugins in the core, but they could be called something else. But those things, that existing mechanism, and then we're building more specialized forms of it. So a theme is a specialized plugin, a particular type of plugin. And here I think the specialization isn't just in terms of how we treat it technically, it's in how we talk about the items that we're sharing, what they're for, what you're supposed to do with it once you get it, and so on. Plus, there's the point that we got to in the last discussion, that we have importing, the idea of bringing in raw tiddlers so that they become part of our wiki, and we were recognizing that there's safety issues with that, and how we probably want to make the default be that what you get from another untrusted wiki is the static HTML of a tiddler that then we can safely render in the wiki that included it. So where I'm going with that is just to suggest that some of the vocabulary we needs to be quite high level to express our intent in federating, rather than expressing the type of way that things are implemented. And so really, for instance, the idea that a bundle might be, and maybe it's too late, maybe there's too much fuzziness about all of these words, but one definition of a bundle that I'd quite like would be the very specific thing of a bundle of tiddlers that I got in their output format from another wiki that I bought in order for me to archive, to read, to make searchable, to be able to apply my own tags to it. And that, to me, would be a very distinct use case than me taking a bunch of functionality from Jed, say, or Tobias, and incorporating it in my wiki because I want to reuse it. And of course, as we noticed last time, one of the differences there is about trust. And we recognized that there's very difficult issues with trust. And I think one of the ways that we can help people is choosing the right vocabulary to make it easier for them to understand the decisions they need to make. So, for instance, having a name like bundle that's a distinct name for those things that I got from another wiki via federation makes it much easier for us to talk about it and to train users to express the configuration options around how content is brought in and so on. So, sorry for that little ramble.
No, that was good. Much appreciated.
We need to draw towards I need to draw towards a close. As I said as well before, in the last two Hangouts, continuous theme has been, for me, the ramifications of realizing that the only way we're going to finish TiddlyWiki is to do it all together. And so federation remains both the things we spent, several of the things we spent time talking about today touch on this theme, where other people, Jed, Mario, are taking on these kinds of tasks within the core. Okay, so one thing I did want to touch on was the resume edition. Jed said a few minutes ago that it'll be really boring and it'll be really quick because if nobody has any questions. But look, my continued emphasis on the resume edition is because I think that it solves a genuine problem. It's a great example of an edition. People who want to put together a resume or curriculum vitae, they've got to choose a tool. They've got a problem to solve, and this is an adequate solution to the problem. It's a great demo of how to build form-filling based TiddlyWikis, and it goes a lot further with its support for multiple resumes and so on than I would ever have imagined. And critically, it's an edition that we're now distributing as part of the core that is maintained by somebody other than me. And that's something, as I say, that I think we need a lot more of. So I really want to continue to shine a spotlight on the resume edition, because hopefully it helps everybody to understand what it might mean to publish an edition, and the value to the community in terms of being able to present TiddlyWiki in a way that makes it a clear, direct solution to a specific problem, instead of being a very generic toolkit that people can do anything with. So Jed, let's see these changes you have made.
Okay, so this, well, there are changes here that I do not know if they should go into the actual edition or not, which is one thing I'm hoping somebody can give feedback on, or feedback on. But this is right now what I have for my personal little resume slash, I guess, portfolio site that I've been working on. This is my local version right now. It is the resume edition as it was. I just added a few more templates, like, and the multi-column thing here. I think I
really
shared
nice.
that on the group, but that's just the list widget that can now give multiple columns. So, but the part of this that I think is more interesting is I've added separate views. So, like, you can click on the icon here, which will bring you to just viewing the resume, or one of the resumes that you have made, as opposed to the editor. So when I actually have this online, what I want to do is have it so that when you go to the site, this is what you see, and then you have the three icons up here where the one will bring you to the resume builder where you can add and edit things in it. One will bring you to just viewing a completed resume, and then the one that I'm having the most trouble putting it into a form that is actually useful is like a detailed portfolio of like everything that you could ever want to put on your resume. You could have here, have details about it.
Like a site map of your resume.
Yes, kind of. That covers everything. Actually, I was talking with, I think it was actually Atul a few weeks ago. I'm sorry if I said your name terribly, I'm bad at that. About creating, a resume site that is, you take this, you extend the resume edition so that every time you do something that you think you might want on your resume, then you can go here, you can add it, and this will collect all of the information you need. And then when you want to go to make a resume, you go to the resume edition, and you're like, if you want to change which skills are displayed on your resume, you can just turn one on or off. Automatically update your resume here, and you can print off your new updated edition. And so yeah, just the three separate things which completely change the layout of the wiki. That part, I was actually quite happy that I could make that work at all. And then I don't know how it will work here, but I've been playing with, it does actually kind of show up. A friend of mine tried to look at this on her phone and it didn't work, so I added some CSS so that the menus change when it is when it's thin, and that it's not done very well at the moment since I just made that work yesterday. But so the updated CSS and the viewer I'm hoping to add to the resume edition that's on the site. For the detailed part, I need to make a good way to have an interface and everything for it before it's on the site. But yes, I also made my own little SVG icons because I felt like playing with SVG stuff. So they're there also. I don't know if I'm going to add them to the normal edition or not, but I like this little control panel icon. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just an aside on icons, I've been playing around with using Unicode pictographic symbols instead of SVGs. There's a lot of them.
Yes, the problem I ran into that, actually, me and Matt ran into that playing with the resume, or not the resume, with Federation. And apparently there's a difference in what symbols are available, because Matt, I think he was using a Mac, was using all of these symbols that looked wonderful on his screen when he was screen sharing and would not show up on my computer, and I use Linux. So
right. Okay. The page that I go to that has a reference to all of the characters, I will look at it on all the platforms I have to see which ones are not available across all of them. But the code points are the same code points. It's a question of whether or not that character is implemented. And for the common code points, not the extended, the super extended ones that are up in the high ranges, but for the more common number ranges, there are definitely existing symbols. Although they might look different on each platform, they exist and they're standardized across the platform. So there is some utility to it for certain kinds of symbols, like arrows, for example. arrows exist on all the platforms, and they're pretty much standardized so that you'll get the same general look. But if you're going for, a picture of a house or something, yeah, that might look different.
I mean, for the ones that I would need were edit a resume, view a resume, detailed resume, that's not something I think I'm going to really find on a
Well, exactly. But I find that a combination of SVG and Unicode characters goes a long way.
Jed, in terms of the core edition of Resume Builder, I think you said you had a couple of questions.
Oh, yes. Well, for the things I'm definitely going to add are the new, the thing to make the multiple columns and the new templates to use here, and a few other little updates. But would it be, do you think it would be useful to make it so that there is also this default view? If it is just going to be a builder edition, I don't know how useful.
It's very difficult to. So here's the thinking: is that we need. I'm imagining editions being lightweight starting positions, and that in reality, anything complicated that we want to distribute, we need to distribute as a plugin so that updates can happen. So there's, so every edition, most editions are going to include a plugin. Sorry, rephrase that. Some editions, some editions will include a plugin so that the core functionality of that edition can be updated. The Tiddly Map edition, for instance, if there was such a thing that was a starting or a starting point for mind mapping, would include that plugin. But any edition that has functionality that's not in a plugin, then obviously people are going to be able to clone it, but they're not going to be able to take advantage of subsequent updates. So that's one kind of obvious thought about structuring these things. So the more functionality that you've embodied in the Resume edition, the more pressure there is to make that be a plugin, in fact, so that we can then do subsequent updates. And the second thing is editions, I feel that if an edition is specialized for a particular function, then it's the differences between that edition and other editions should only pertain to that function, if you see what I mean. So it would seem odd if the Resume edition had some other arbitrary subject, what's the word? Some arbitrary enhancements that may or may not make it better, but were nothing to do with resuming. So here, you could totally imagine your view stuff, I think, as being part of a different kind of fancy preview plugin. I don't know, and I'm not suggesting you should do that at all, but just that there is, there's more than one way one could skin this functionality. But here, I guess the best guide is the fact that you're using it. The ideal edition is one created by somebody who is actually using it for the intended purpose. And so if all the stuff we say about how editions should behave, if it stopped the correspondence between the edition you're publishing and the edition you're using, then we'd kind of lose out on what we gain from the fact that you're improving it for yourself as well as for the community.
Okay. Well, in that, I think then I'm just going to stick to just the builder part of it.
I think it's all, we talked before about how there's also a sense in which all of the editions are great sort of showcases for techniques, and here, it's a bit of a tour de force for a kind of what's the word? For a kind of what's the word? Well, fancy form-based transclusion, let's call it. I don't think that's quite the right word for it. Anyway.
Hello.
Please go
ahead. Jed, just like I was discussing last time after the Hangout, did you find if it's possible that we have a plugin to your edition, which when added could sort of further the edition from just being a passive resume to being an active portfolio, and so that we don't need X API saving somewhere, we could just have, even if it is self, just for my own knowledge, how much I have done, You know what I'm talking about. The analytics, the learning analytics, if I could have how many hours of videos have I seen, what all have I been doing, if I could get a sense of that, then it could be a sort of a more active edition. It could be a live edition rather than a passive resume where I write whatever I feel like.
Yes, I think that for that, and going along with what, or based on what Jeremy just said also, what I should do and what will hopefully happen is I'll make something that is, I guess, instead of the resume edition, it would be the empty edition here where you have your different things where you can go through each one. And then each one of these would be a plugin that you would add. And so you could have your resume builder plugin inside some like dashboard alternate interface for the TiddlyWiki full thing itself. And then you would add whichever other plugin you want here. And like your idea of an analytics sort of plugin showing, giving you nice graphical feedback for your things that you have done, I think would actually be a very good addition to the, a collection of tools to go along with the resume edition. It would not be part of the resume edition, but if I could make the edition, a set of plugins or an equivalent set of plugins to the edition or something like that.
I think also you're exploring quite interesting, I mean, those are interesting questions in relation to federation as well. This is all about how do we slice and group things together for easy consumption by other people. So I think it's quite an interesting area for you to be thinking about with your other federation hat on.
Yes, I've been very inconsistent on what I've been working on since the last Hangout, so little tiny bits of everything.
That's what's fun, though, isn't it? So have I. I mean, I'm having spent some time, talking about the imperatives of TiddlyWiki. The main bit of TiddlyWiki work I've done in the last week is something that I did plan to do. Well, I mean, I had intended to do, but it was kind of a surprise, which was this new preview pane to show the paths tree and the widget tree. And yeah, it's fun. One in the same vein, actually, a fresh distraction is there has been lots of discussion about how useful it would be to have buttons in the editor that allowed you to do things like select some text and then embolden it by clicking on the button. And I know a number of people have worked on this problem, and there's been hitherto a reasonably fundamental problem, which is that when you click on the button, the selection within the text box is lost, and that's a function of how browsers work. But I was reminded today, really annoyingly, of a technique that I knew 10 years ago for getting around it, and I'd completely forgotten, which is basically to put the text area within an embedded iframe, and then it gets its own selection tracking. So as long as the toolbar buttons are in the main iframe and the text area was within the iframe,
Jeremy?
It kind of works. Hiya.
Yeah, in TiddlyWiki Classic, I built the quick edit toolbar, and essentially they were buttons that invoked some JavaScript, and the one thing they needed was the function is to find out what edit field was the edit field that you had been in so that it could get the current selection, but it didn't lose the current selection when you clicked on the button. So I'm not sure what I did there, but I had it so that you could click the button and it would know which edit field you were in. It would get the current selection from the edit field, so it didn't lose the selection.
Well, you can try it in TiddlyWiki 5. I mean, if you, the example is if you go to tiddlywiki.com, sorry, what am I trying to say? Go to tiddlywiki.com and create a new tiddler. What am I trying to say to try it?
Oh, I have no doubt that it's different. I'm just saying that in Classic, so I don't think it's a browser specific, specifically a browser limitation, because I mean I had something working.
You click outside a text box, like if you go to tiddlywiki.com, like right here, and you type in some things, select that, and then click Show Preview. Then
you did that.
Outside the text
and
box.
you do it in TiddlyWiki Classic too. You must have been doing something, Eric.
Well, I'm pretty sure this.
Try classic.tiddlywiki.com, Jed. Gosh, and it must be funny for you, Jed, as a non-TiddlyWiki 5, non-TiddlyWiki Classic user.
Yeah. Wait, am I doing something wrong here? What am I doing here?
Well, select some text and then click somewhere else while the editor's still open.
Yeah, and that's...
Well, that's not a valid test because you're not in a true edit mode. You're in a disabled editor field, so you have to enable editing.
I actually do not remember how to do that at all.
Go to the options.
Or you can do it with the search box instead. Select something in the search box or the your name box.
Yeah, see, like anything I click on outside of that.
So I think you must have had a fix in there, Eric. Maybe it was the same iframe fix. Well, I'm going to leave you to research that. But I wanted to share with you my excitement at remembering a technique that might actually let us do that. Because there's a load of usability features there. There's people who want easy access to bold and italic and a comfortable formatting toolbar. But there's also plenty of people who want to be able to do sophisticated macro processing on the contents of text areas, during editing, expanding brief keystroke, abbreviations, and so on. So I think there's a huge be a huge breakthrough if we fix that. Sorry, Jed, I can't actually see your screen. What are you showing us here? Things an ideal collaborative writing platform.
Oh, that's just notes that I was thinking of with a friend of mine. That's not actually relevant to our discussion. But
okay, so everybody, I wanted to say thank you very much indeed once again for your time. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everything that we wanted to talk about. We had today a very lengthy discussion about infrastructure. I hope that wasn't too frustrating for everybody else, but it was very useful. And sadly, we have to pay attention to our infrastructure. It ain't going to fix itself. So much appreciate your patience as we deal with that. Thank you very much to Eric and to Jed for demonstrating their bits. Always a great pleasure to see what other people are doing. And of course, I should have said thank you very much to Mario for his work. And Mario and I will report back at we'll give an update at the next Hangout of where we are. Scott, I'm glad we managed to touch on some of your questions, aware that the backlog of undiscussed Scott questions also trails off into the background, but we will hope to continue to make progress. As usual now, we'll close the broadcast and then we'll hang around for a few minutes. But everybody, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you next time and we'll announce the next Hangout soon. Many thanks. Bye. Cheers.